Do you like JRPGs? I like JRPGs. In fact, I like them so much I wanted to start doing game reviews of them on my YouTube channel. And I figured the best place to start was with one of the first JRPGs, Dragon Warrior 1 for the NES. Or Dragon Quest 1 is technically Dragon Quest in its original Japanese translation, but Dragon Warrior is the name they gave it in America for whatever reason, probably copyright or something. And it's the name I'm going to be using for these reviews because I think it just rolls off the tongue better. So I played through the whole game, the original NES version, and is Dragon Warrior 1 good? Well, no, not really, it's not. Dragon Warrior was the originator of the entire genre that we call JRPGs today. There pretty much wasn't anything like this before it, but JRPGs as a genre, or at least older ones, tend to be known for having level grinding. A lot of level grinding. And guess where that started? It started here. My issue with Dragon Warrior isn't really the grinding, though. It's how little there is in between the hours-long grinding sessions. Every time I grinded out enough levels to move on to the next area would usually consist of little more than talking to one townsperson to get an item, followed by the next hours-long grinding session. The only exceptions are dungeons, and there's only about 4. The plot is really bare bones. I'd put a spoiler warning here, but there's really nothing to spoil. It mostly boils down to, there's a bad guy, stop the bad guy. You play as a descendant of this guy named Erdrick, a badass knight dude who defeated a bad guy called the Dragon Lord decades ago. But we won't get to play as him until Dragon Warrior 3, I think. So for now we're just a guy who happens to be descended from Erdrick. Anyway, the Dragon Lord stole a magical artifact called the Ball of Light, which you know is important and good because it's got the word light in the name. So now it's our job to go find the Dragon Lord and kick his teeth in so we can get that Ball of Light back. Upon starting the game, we're in a room with this king who sends us on our quest, and we get a good look at our character. I really like the character sprites in this game, they look good. I can't really say the same for the environments, though. All the dungeons are just bricks. Also, the king's the only save point, so anytime I want to save my game, I have to come all the way back to this castle. Just next to the castle is a town, and we spend the first hour or so of our quest sleeping in this town. Every time our health runs low, we grind slimes. That's basically this game's gameplay for the first few hours. Grind until you reach the next town, and then grind some more. So, is the combat system good? It's okay. You only have your one character the whole game, no other party members, and you only ever fight one enemy at a time. You do start getting spells though, and I actually think the magic system is pretty good. There's 10 spells you can get, and you learn them by leveling up. You get a new one every couple of levels. And none of these are useless or extremely situational either. They're all pretty useful throughout your quest. Well, except the hurt spell. That spell sucks, because you only have it for a pretty small amount of time before your normal weapon attacks start doing more damage. So why waste magic on a spell that's weaker than your sword? Other than that, the spell selection's pretty good. You get heal, which heals you, then hurt, which sucks, then sleep, which is a good way to buy yourself a few turns when it works, and most enemies are actually vulnerable to it. Then you have Radiant, which lights up dark caves, and is brighter than torch items. You get to do the same thing. Then you get Stop Spell, which prevents magic monsters from casting spells, and then Outside and Return, which teleport you out of dungeons or back to the castle. Then there's Repel, which prevents weaker monsters from wasting your time with random encounters. Finally, there's Heal More and Hurt More, which heal more and hurt more. They're good. They also all don't cost all that many magic points to use, so you can actually cast them pretty often before having to worry about running low on magic, which I like. Everyone's played a game where they get cool magic, but you can only cast it so few times that you run out too quickly for it to really be helpful most of the time. Here, it's cheap enough to pretty much always be a viable option. I do have one big complaint about the combat, though, and that's that while the spells are useful, there's very few situations where you have to strategize. The game doesn't really give you meaningful choices for how you fight. There's almost always an obvious best option. Like when you fight a spellcaster, there's no reason to not cast Stop Spell. When you're hurt after a fight, there's no reason to not heal. The only real choice is choosing whether to risk casting Sleep on an enemy or just keep hitting it until it dies. Which, yeah, that's a choice, because sometimes Sleep doesn't work, but it's really an interesting choice that makes you think carefully or strategize. Most of the time, you're not thinking about how you want to fight. You're just executing the already obvious best course of action. There are technically optional dungeons and mini-bosses, but for the most part they suffer from a similar problem. If I'm already grinding, I may as well do it in the dungeon so that I can get the stronger equipment there while I'm at it. You can skip the dungeons, but it'd be stupid to. Why would you? The exception is the boss guarding the princess. Oh, right. Also, the bad guy kidnapped a princess and put her in a dungeon guarded by a dragon. This is the only truly optional thing in the game. You choose whether to try and fight the dragon, and if you win and save the princess, she gives you an item that tells you how much experience you need to level up, which you otherwise have to go ask the king for. To the game's credit, I think this is a good optional side quest. I like how you can just skip the princess if you don't think that item is worth it. But at the same time, it's not useless, depending on whether it's something that might be important to you personally. Once I get the 3 magic plot items this game has, which are Sunstones, a Staff of Rain, and Erdrick's Token, from Dungeons and Swamps, I can create a rainbow bridge to the Dragon Lord's castle, and for the most part, I think this is a damn good final dungeon. Upon entering the castle, you can go down the stairs in either tower, but they both lead to a labyrinth of dead ends. A hint from an NPC you can find earlier in the game, though, leads you to check behind the Dragon Lord's throne in his throne room, revealing the true path through the dungeon. You'll need to cast the Radiant spell multiple times to get to the bottom, as it wears off over time, and the dungeon is really, really long. You need the best spells and equipment to survive down here due to how powerful the monsters here are. The best sword in the game, Erdrick's sword, is hidden in this dungeon as well. There's also a trap stairway that leads to an endless maze you're stuck wandering in until you die, which is pretty unfair, but that's to be expected for a final dungeon in the NES era. Once you reach the bottom, you can finally challenge the Dragon Lord, and holy shit, I hate this boss! Once you beat his wimpy human form and he turns into a huge dragon, he does one thing. He hurts you. A lot. He doesn't cast any spells, there's no strategy here, he just keeps hitting you with fire and his bite, until either you die or he dies. There's no smart way to get past this boss. Your weapon attacks deal single digits of damage to him when they rip everything else apart. You can't put him to sleep. He has no spells for you to cast stop spell on, and your only good damaging spell, Hurt More, only has a 1 in 16 chance of affecting him. The only way to beat this boss is to be high enough level and keep healing. Or you could use save states in an emulator to keep using a Hurt More on him until it works and kill him in 3 turns. Like I did, because I didn't want to grind half a dozen more levels. After shamelessly cheesing the Dragon Lord, I obtain the Ball of Light, and all monsters are banished from the land. I walk back to the castle in triumph. Also, all the townspeople have new dialogue thanking me for being such a hero. That's a nice touch. The king tells me I can take his place and be king, which sounds pretty sweet, but my character is too heroic to accept his offer, and decides to go keep adventuring. Then the princess, because I saved her, comes out and asks me to take her with me on my journey, and I can't say no. And then the credits roll and the game is done. So I have mixed feelings on this game. On the one hand, I don't ever want to touch it again, mostly because of the excessive grinding and lack of any real engagement in the combat system. But on the other, I still think the game has value as a part of history. This might have been the first video game ever to treat its story with this amount of seriousness and importance. Sure, the plot boils down to just beating the bad guy and saving the land, but it still has a story that feels more than just an excuse to go fight monsters. Without this game, we wouldn't have Final Fantasy or Pokemon or Paper Mario. I may not have liked this game on its own, but it still kickstarted an entire genre that the world wouldn't get to enjoy today without it. I also think that many of the game's flaws can be forgiven-ish in the context of the era in which this game was made. This game wasn't designed to be done in a few hours. It was meant to last a kid a whole summer vacation, and I think it delivered on that. This was before the internet existed, and half the fun of a game like this was discovering things for yourself. You weren't supposed to beat this game's challenges in one go. You were supposed to keep trying them, drawing maps and talking to every last hidden townsperson for vital hints. Do I want games today to be made with this design philosophy? No. But I think it worked for the audience games are going for back then. If you want to experience this game today, it's been remade a few times. There's remakes for the Game Boy Color, Super Nintendo, mobile, and a new collection of the first 3 Dragon Quest games is out on Switch. Man, how come the character sprites here are a different resolution than the environments? Is anyone else, super bugged by that? No? Just me? All these are easier than the original NES version, and most of them come with improved translations and dialogue to help flesh out the game's world, but at the same time, Dragon Warrior 1 is so archaic in its design that I think the only reason you'd ever play it is because of its historical value. And if you're doing that, you may as well just play it in its original form. While I kinda hated Dragon Quest, it did make me excited to play the rest of the series, which would improve on the ideas it brought to the table. But first, I'm going to be playing and reviewing a couple other JRPGs from the same era, and the next one is a game I have a soft spot for. I'll see you next episode when I review Final Fantasy 1.